Hello, welcome to another amazing Department of Medicine Grand Rounds. I'm Allison Bond, the Director of Grand Rounds, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, all the way from Philadelphia. I won't go through all of his accolades because I want to have time for the actual lecture, but I will tell you that he's a Vice Provost for Global Initiatives and the Diane V.S. Levy and Robert M. Levy University Professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also an oncologist and the most widely cited bioethicist in history. He was founding chair of the Department of Bioethics at the end in chemistry from Amherst, MD PhD from Harvard, and Master's of Science in biochemistry at Oxford. He holds joint appointments in the Department of Medical Ethics and Health Policy at the Perelman School of Medicine and the Department of Healthcare Management at the Wharton School. Take it away. Thank you.
It's great to be here. Hopefully we'll get this right. All right, I work with a number of different companies, and I think I'm pretty fair in saying none of this conflicts with anything I'm talking about now. Anyone know who this guy is? Yeah, right. How many of you have read Outlive by any chance? One person? Two people? Wow. Anyone know this? Listen to the podcast? Yes, just like my research assistants, right? So welcome to California, home of the longevity and wellness epicenter of the world, with a little outpost now transferred with some nonsensical billionaires to Austin as well. Yes, this is the center of the wellness industrial complex where everyone wants to live to 150. Let's talk about how many of you ate breakfast today? Whoa, how many of you made it not just a muffin and coffee? I'm impressed, actually. I certainly didn't when I was in your position. How many hours did people sleep? 8? 7? 6? 5? Yeah, well, okay. Exercise regularly, 75 minutes of vigorous activity. Oh, better than I would have thought. You guys aren't working hard enough. This is a very important graph, which looks at life expectancy on the left and healthcare expenditures on the right, on the x-axis, and goes over time from 1970 to 2023. And you can see that we're in the pack there, and then we break off the pack. And we don't have any pediatricians here, but I would ask you, what does this look like? It looks like a graph of failure to thrive, very much so. And that break point, who want to keep score about this, is 1980, roughly. And you might think about what happened in 1980, slightly before and after that caused that break, and why we're in such a bad spot compared to the rest of the world. In terms of chronic disease, 50% of Americans have one chronic condition. 85 to 90 cents of every dollar spent in the healthcare system, which is now over $5.3 trillion, is spent on people with chronic illnesses. Only 4% of U.S. spending goes to primary care. Hospitals and specialists account for over 45% of all medical spending. And they mainly treat exacerbations of chronic illness and not the chronic illness themselves. And most of the chronic illnesses, amazingly enough, could be prevented through adoption of healthy lifestyle recommendations back on that curve. I lecture basically hospitals and our medical profession was developed in the early to mid 20th century after the Flexner report. And it was mainly developed to treat acute illnesses that were causing high rates of death at that period of time: diarrhea, tuberculosis, influenza, pneumonia, and you might not believe it, but car accidents were a large source of morbidity and mortality, mainly because they were brand new, pretty much unregulated, and maniacs were on the road. a whole host of changes: sanitation, better food supply, antibiotics, vaccination, and surgical advances in the 50s made these deaths drop off the top 10. By 1960, none of the acute illnesses except pneumonia, influenza were in the top 10 causes of death. However, the infrastructure that was developed to treat them persisted. Interestingly, they did not change when the disease burden in the country changed. So I would argue that to effectively prevent and treat chronic illnesses, medicine needs wellness. If you just look at this graph, you've seen this graph, it's really important, and we still don't absorb it, right? Genetics accounts for about 30% of health and well-being. Healthcare services, what you provide on a daily basis, a mere 10. You want to be generous, I'll give you 20%. Everything else, social and environmental factors, individual behaviors, accounts for the bulk, 60 to 70% of what makes people healthy and well. And we tend to ignore that in our towers of medicine here. These things include sleep, diet, exercise, and mental health. So that's actually the bulk of what we need to address if we want to address wellness, I would argue. The problems with wellness today are there's a ton of information overload, if any of you have tried to keep up with it. It's overly complex. It's reductionist simultaneously. There's a ton of conflicts of interest, makes medicine look like angels. And there's a huge incentive for commodification in this area. Wellness has exploded. The sheer volume of wellness stuff has just increased. Just take the New York Times Well column, which some of you may have looked at. I don't know whether you still read newspapers. Between 2023 and 2024, they grew their staff 50% when they were cutting almost everything else at the newspaper. Just gives you a huge sense for how much volume there is. Wellness is hugely overcomplicated. You know, that guy at the start who looks so happy, he said, our only goal is to live longer and live better, to outlive. I don't know if that's your only goal, but that seems to me to be a stupid only goal in life. Here's his workout plan, and you might not be able to read it, but you've got things like stability, lower body strength for 70 minutes a week, stability in 60 minutes, zone 2, aerobic efficiency, another 70. You add it up, it's 10 hours a week of workout. How many of you do 10 hours a week? How many of you even aspire to 10 hours a week? Part of the problem is it makes it complex. And this isn't even the worst of it. The worst of it is here. I noticed that many of you didn't crack his book. That's good for you. But if you crack his book, one of the things he does go through in terms of wellness is the mTOR pathway. Now, maybe some of you remember the mTOR pathway. Yeah, I can see some of you nodding your heads or shaking your heads, whichever it is. Yes, most of us, when we practice medicine at the absolute highest level here at UCSF, have no idea about the mTOR pathway. And guess what? We don't need to know either. And he goes through this long disquisition in his book about the right squat. He even has a photograph in it, and he's got these angles. Do you really need to know that to be well? I leave it to you to draw a conclusion. One of the interesting things in human behavior is that we have a tendency to address problems by adding things. There's a 2021 study in Nature, and if you haven't looked at it, I would highly recommend it. And they gave people this Lego problem where at the far end, one of the four corners has a support. And they said, stabilize this so we can put a brick on top and it won't collapse. You may figure this out, but almost everyone stabilizes it by adding a piece here or here or here. Even after reminded, only 41% of people took out that piece at the back, even when they were paid more to take the piece out rather than add. We have this additive bias. When we confront the problem, we add something. You can see it throughout healthcare. And if you don't believe me, just think of adding Medicare, adding Medicaid, adding CHIP, adding the exchanges. We add galore. And this goes in lots of other areas. We add medications and on in lots of other contexts. This is a way that we actually complicate wellness as well as almost every other part of healthcare. If you see this graph, when people associate with the word wellness, physical health, mental health, sleep, spiritual well-being, body care, clean eating, I would ask you what's missing from this graph. This is a very reductionist approach to wellness. It emphasized diet, exercise, and sleep. And if you look at the myriad of books like Atiya's Outlive and almost every other book you can imagine in this space, super agers, this is what they emphasize. The three physical elements, you might say, of wellness. They leave out what I will argue shortly is the most important elements of wellness and minimize them. There's a ton of conflicts of interest in this area. Everyone know who this guy is? Anyone know who this guy is? Who is he? Yeah, it's Brian Johnson, the multi-millionaire who spends $2 million a year trying to live longer, taking pills and his son's blood transfusions and also, he's very happy to tell you that he's the most monitored person in the world. And when I asked him, well, why do you want to live longer to 150 years? I got a very important answer. Silence. He didn't have an answer for that. Simple question. But he's selling longevity. This is what you get at his website. If you go there and look for it, yes, you yourself can get a laser cap with red lights in the top for $999. Andrew Huberman, who one of you was listening to his podcast, plugging AG1, a very important supplement with absolutely no data behind it. And this all goes along with the commodification incentive. Wellness is now just another commodity. The wellness industrial complex ranks at about $6 trillion a year globally, going up to $9 trillion before the end of this decade. In the United States, depending on what you count in that wellness, the very minimum is $1 trillion a year. That's 3% of GDP. The actual association of all wellness producers clocks it in at $2 trillion a year that is spent on wellness. I don't know how many of you have gym memberships, but you're counted in that too. And most of these things promise very quick fixes. 87% of millennials and Gen Z TikTok users report using a platform for nutrition and health advice rather than consulting you. That's, I think, a shocking number. They don't trust you but they trust TikTok more. A survey of 67,000 TikTok videos found that only 2.1% proved accurate when compared to public health and nutrition guidelines. So that's the kind of misinformation that this wellness industrial complex is creating out there that the public is consuming. And there's a huge desire for wellness. Wellness was named the top or an important priority for 84% of US consumers. The industry is resilient, very resilient. During the Great Recession in 2008 to 2010, the US GDP fell by 3% because of the housing crisis, but sales of vitamins and supplements grew by 6%. Those vitamins and supplements, by the way, most medical professionals think are totally unnecessary, except for very small segments of the population, but like women about to become pregnant or people with certain vegans who don't necessarily get enough vitamin B12, etc. I would argue that we are failing. We are failing in the wellness space, which the public clearly wants. Here's one reason we're failing. These are pictures taken at a hospital or medical centers I'm associated with, but not responsible for. I've complained about these pictures. On the left is what you get at one of our hospitals that focuses on orthopedic surgery and hip replacements. You can see lots of things like Kit Kats there, potato chips. Very hard to find anything healthy. On the left, there's a little water here on the right, which is healthy, but plenty of sodas, which are not healthy. Here is the picture of the snack bar for medical students at my illustrious hospital, which I vehemently complained about. Very difficult to find anything healthy here. The only thing I could find was hummus with pretzels, literally. I mean, you can see this, you know. There's a word for this, right? Junk food. This is what we're giving, right? This is purely hypocritical. And until recently, at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, the restaurant in the lobby was, yes, McDonald's. They changed that. It's now Panera's. All right. Why is this our problem? Well, first, we don't think wellness is important. On the government side, the FDA does not classify food as medicine, interestingly enough. Physicians don't talk about wellness with their patients. An old study found that weight was mentioned in only 17% of encounters with overweight patients. Trained medical students observed that primary care physicians consult patients on dietary habits only 25% of visits and exercise only 20% of visits. I'm not going to judge what you do. I am going to talk about some issue. A recent survey by a professor at Brigham Young University, who's an expert on social interaction, looked at healthcare providers at Hopkins, Kaiser, and UCSF. And you might see here social integration, which she ranked as the second most important wellness attribute. And I will say it's actually the most important. And you can see how far down rankings by people at those medical schools in terms of how important they thought social interaction was for wellness and dealing with their patients. From 2012 to 2017, only 16% of projects and 22% of NIH research funding was allocated for primary and secondary prevention of chronic illnesses. Might give you a sense of how our funding organizations rank this. And 7 to 9% of its total budget on behavioral interventions to prevent chronic illness. Not a high priority. I don't know about your medical training. I have a small focus group of former medical students, now residents, and some medical students, asking them about how to assess wellness in patients, how to individualize wellness regimens and motivate patients to incorporate wellness in their lives. One of the problems is few faculty have wellness expertise and few medical schools have departments dedicated to lifestyle medicine. There are some, and notably, they're almost exclusively in what you would consider tier 3 medical schools, right? I'm not a snob. Yes, I am a snob. I would consider them tier 3 too. You would just, the tier 1 schools, of which UCSF is one, you know, generally don't have lifestyle medicine, much less nutrition and other things. Here are just a sample of my totally biased focus groups. We've not really discussed exercise and sleep in wellness terms, only risk factors of disease, although we have trained to ask about exercise in our standardized patients. Sleep is definitely not asked at all, nor taught to be asked about, honestly. I don't know whether you're trained to ask about how many hours of sleep someone gets. I would venture to say it's not a routine part of history taking. During cardio block, we had some discussion of AHA guidelines and general benefits of exercise. But being preclinical, little was taught on how to teach patients and more was taught on the evidence base for exercise. We had 1 day of lectures on sleep and consciousness during the neuro block, nothing beyond that 1 day. maybe they're unusual, but diet, exercise, and sleep play critical roles. In a 2021 survey of medical students, 92.1% of respondents stated that they had not received any formal training on physical activity throughout their medical education. 2014, older, 71% of medical schools had failed to provide the recommended 25 hours of required nutrition education. The summer, breaking with tradition, NYU Long Island, not its New York Manhattan campus, its primary care campus on Long Island, is now talking about trialing a new 3-year longitudinal course on nutrition to span the entire medical school. Now, in 2023, 2024, the AMA was very happy to announce that all medical schools reported covering some nutritional content in the required curricula. The problem is it's not fully integrated into the training across all the years of the curriculum, and we have no data on the quantity or the quality of such training on diet, exercise, and sleep. There's plenty of training on how to engage patients, but not on this topic. Here's one example I would give you. 47% of Americans have hypertension. The DASH diet, highly effective. It's the equivalent of one drug to reduce hypertension and blood pressure. Online survey of 3,000 US adults found that only 1% of respondents had tried the DASH diet within the last year. 1%. What percent of adults have hypertension? 50%. Yeah, well, it's 40%. Okay, right? 50%, right? 1% of people have tried the DASH diet. Why do you think it's so low? Let me give you a hint. We don't push it. I'm not sure how many of you know what the DASH diet is. I won't embarrass any of you. Nutrition and eating. This is what one of my Mount Sinai residents said. So student, nutrition and eating, we focus on the basics, preventing vitamin deficiency and risk factors for obesity, hypertension, diabetes. We briefly covered 8 essentials from the AHA on decreasing mortality, but no training on the DASH diet. He had not heard of it from his training there. And in general, physicians feel underprepared. And we feel underprepared. We don't talk about it. Patients feel as if wellness is neglected. 45% of US adults with primary care physicians said they wish their doctor asked them why they want to be healthy, indicating a desire for care that incorporates wellness. And 57% of people wish their doctor would talk to them about treatments that don't involve medication like the DASH diet. All right. We do train people and how to motivate patients, but it's not clear it includes wellness. So this brings me to my 6 simple rules for a long and healthy life. That is attempting not to be overcomplicated, not to be too reductionistic, and not to overwhelm you. The first rule is simple. Don't be a schmuck. The second rule is also simple. Talk to people. Expand your mind, eat your ice cream, move it, and sleep like a baby. I think it's important that wellness should be a lifestyle, but not life-consuming. One of the reasons I don't think Peter Attia is right, that he argues that wellness, outliving should be our priority, right? It should be what we're focused on. It should be our primary goal, is that it's not our primary goal. We have other things that are important in life, and wellness should be a way to get to them, not the goal itself. I think one of the problems of the wellness industrial complex is it confuses the means to a goal with the goal. We also need to be clear. Wellness has to be sustained across your whole life, years and decades, to be effective. Dry January. How many of you are participating in Dry January? Don't reveal. Don't embarrass yourselves, right? It's an idiotic idea, right? If alcohol is bad for you, it's something you have to do 12 months a year, not 1 month, and the other 11 months you're going to drink normally. It just makes no sense. Yet this is critical to what the wellness industrial complex is pushing for you. So you have to get something that you can have as a habit that you enjoy and that you can sustain for the rest of your life. And that gets me to You have to prioritize a few healthy habits. You can't boil the ocean, just not going to be sustainable. And 10 hours a week that Peter Attia recommends is just not going to be sustainable for normal people like yourselves. Therefore, wellness cannot be biohacking. I have no idea what biohacking is. To the extent that I can figure it out, right? It's wellness people thinking they've outsmarted evolution and doing a lot of extreme stuff. You know, if a little is good, a lot more must be better. It's also a lot of self-denial, right? Not doing something, putting it away. And we know that doesn't work. How do we know? I don't know how many of you have made New Year's resolutions, but by the end of February, 80+% of all New Year's resolutions are in the dustbin and not effective. Can't be that you're going to just deny yourself your way to health. It's just not going to work. And I would argue that obsessing over data, you know, I don't know how many of you are wearing Oura rings or monitoring your steps or monitoring your heart rate constantly or what you eat and the protein, just not important. And the minor adjustments you make, like Peter Attia's squat, irrelevant to living a long life, just totally irrelevant. He has no data. It's going to add a minute to his life. All right. The other thing I would point out, and this goes back to my point about self-denial, lots of good data that your willpower, your ability to push on is easily fatigued, and you cannot get to wellness by simple willpower. You can start with willpower, but unless that becomes a habit and you have to stop exercising willpower, it will not be sustained. A 2016 study found that making continuous difficult decisions, like with willpower, led to 20% increase in impulsive behavior. The more willpower you exercise, the more you want immediate rewards, not being willing to invest in the long term. And this will be a very relevant study to you. Researchers at Penn followed 4,000 healthcare workers across 37 hospitals with over 13 million hand washing opportunities to prevent infection in the hospital. This is what happens with compliance over a 12-hour shift. What you notice is compliance goes down. The more you have to force yourself to wash your hands and actually remember and do it, the less compliant you get. And you can see there's a 25% drop over time. It's never really great. It's at 42%. And you can get this to reset from 34, but it actually takes multiple days of not being at work and recharging yourself and recharging your willpower. We cannot exercise our willpower to get wellness. It's just not going to work. So let's go through my 6 rules. Don't be a schmuck. I would actually argue, contrary to our additive bias, that a lot of wellness is focusing on what we shouldn't do and what we should stop doing. We know about not smoking, not drinking, not texting and driving. We should avoid self-destructive risks. Much of the self-destructive risks are things we know but don't actually do. I tried to figure out what the schmuckiest move you could get is. So one possibility is owning a loaded gun at home. Brilliant study done by Stanford researchers here in California looked at 18 million cases of gun ownership. House owners that kept a gun at home were twice as likely to die by homicide relative to a neighbor in the same area, not in a different, safer neighborhood, in the same area to die by homicide. Why is that? Because the person likely to kill you with a gun is a friend or relative who's going to come into the house, grab that, or have a gun because they're in that network and die. Irresponsibly stored guns without a safety lock and loaded, usually in a nightstand drawer or a dresser drawer, is the number one reason we have deaths, or the number one cause of deaths among children. Surpass swimming and water deaths. Now, when I started my book, I thought that the schmuckiest move was base jumping. Everyone know what base jumping is? You get into the squirrel suit, right? You got the wings, flying squirrel, right? You jump off a mountain. You have no parachute, no propulsion. You're at the behest of the wind. The risk of dying in base jumping is 1 in 2,700 jumps. People still do it. I can't figure out why. And it turns out it's not the schmuckiest thing you can do. Anyone have any idea what would be more schmucky? Doing it drunk. No, paying $100,000 to climb Mount Everest. 1 in 100 climbers attempting to Everest, including the mountaineering experts and the Sherpas, die on the mountain. And let me tell you one thing, a secret. No one is expending one breath of air trying to get your bones back down. So you are frozen up there for the rest of eternity, right? And if you're 59 years and older, and Mark and I qualify as that, your chance of dying up there are 1 in 25. That's pretty schmucky, right? Anyone taking that? There are plenty of billionaires spending $100,000 for what exactly? I can't figure it out. Turns out that's not the schmuckiest thing you can do in America. That is to be president. 45 men have been president. 4 were killed in office. Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and JFK. That's a 1 in 11 chance of being killed in the job. And that doesn't even include 8 quote unquote successful assassination attempts. That is where someone got off a gun, ran a car into someone, didn't kill the president. Might have injured the president, might have killed someone else. In the case of FDR, someone shot at FDR and killed the mayor of Chicago, Cermak, right? So you've got a 1 in 4 chance of being shot at and maybe killed, and a 1 in 11 chance of actually being killed. So moral of the story, don't try to be president, schmucky move. I keep telling my brother that, don't get a response. Talk to people. One of the things that I would argue that is consistently left off of all these wellness advice is social relations. And it's probably the single most important thing people can do for their wellness. The Harvard study of adult development, you may not know this study, but it began in the late 1930s, enrolled Harvard sophomores, including JFK and Ben Bradley, who is the editor of the Post during the halcyon days of Watergate affair. And then it combined with a survey of other kids from poorer backgrounds in Boston, but who hadn't had a criminal record. And then they enrolled their spouses and their children. It's a study going on for 85 years. The single most important predictor of health, longevity, and happiness was in social relationships. Having close family, close friends that you interacted with. Today, loneliness is hugely important. Number of people eating alone has gone up from 33% of meals in 2003 to over 50% and keeps going up. 19% of the population has 0 or 1 close friends, and that is it. A dramatic increase from 6% a few decades ago. Number 1 use case of generative AI is therapy and companionship. There's tons of other studies about the benefits of social engagement. US study of 13,000 Americans over 50 found that friendships were associated with a 24% reduction in the risk of dying. Australian study of adults over 70, larger friendship networks were associated with a 22% decrease in 10-year mortality. Swedish study over 6 years found a 30% decline in the risk of mortality from close friendships, and you can go on and on. There's more than 3 million people who've been studied in this. And the UK Biobank, using MRI data, shows that socially isolated individuals exhibit lower gray matter volumes in the temporal, frontal, and hippocampal regions, and a 26% increase in the risk of dementia. There is nothing you can do for your life more important than having rich social relationships, close friends, as well as casual interactions. And this isn't psychological, this is biological, right? having close friends, interacting with close friends leads to oxytocin release. It also increases your dopamine, decreases your cortisol levels. Lots and lots of data that this has big physiological, social relations have big physiological impacts on us. After all, we have this very important frontal lobe for a reason, and the main reason is social interaction. So I would argue that relationships aren't optional extras. They're central to wellness, and they're central to wellness for your patients. But we don't ask about social relations. There's no strenuous exertion for payback. So you don't have to exert today for payback in the future. You get benefits right today. It's good for you. And it turns out it's also good for the person you're interacting with. So you can be virtuous at the same time when you talk to them. And it makes people happier. A University of Chicago study, a guy named Nick Epley, right, looked at social interactions on public trains and buses, people commuting into Chicago to work. And they found that ordinary commuters who were required to talk to someone during that commute were happier when they talked to strangers on that commute than if they didn't. And that holds for extroverts as well as introverts. And researchers in Canada looked at 1,000 people during COVID isolation and found that even among introverts, those who lived with other people and interacted with other people during the COVID lockdowns, so they weren't getting outside interaction, actually did better. So I want to conclude this part with my dad's advice. Conversations are good. Start one. Let curiosity drive the conversation. When I get onto a plane or a train, which I do multiple times a week, I ask the person sitting next to me, why are you going to whatever city we're going to? Sometimes I don't say anything. Mostly they do want to interact. Ask questions and ask follow-up questions. It indicates that you're actually paying attention, right? And don't be so fragile. Yes, maybe they don't want to interact with me. They're monosyllabic or they don't say anything. Okay, what have I lost? Has my ego been bruised? Hardly. And most likely it'll be good for you. Expand your mind. There are two important factors that determine the rate of cognitive decline. One is called cognitive reserve, how much brain power you start with, right? And that is heavily determined by your education level. So you're already gotten a lot of education, probably the maximum amount you can get in a lifetime. But I would say this is one of the problems we have now with this sort of denigration of collegiate education in our society, right? Oh, you don't make as much money, and evaluating college educations by how much money people make after they graduate without thinking about, well, how much brain power did they get because of that? When you start at a higher plane, right, if you're going down at the same level, you'll actually go down, your cognitive decline will become apparent much further out. And that's one of the great things. And the rate of cognitive decline is determined by a lot of things, one of which is, as I'll talk about in a second, is retirement. The other of which are passive activities. A lot of people retire and they do important things like watch TV when they were working. Very bad for your brain power. This is one of the most important studies out of RAND. They looked at when people on average retired. You can see the United States and Denmark and Switzerland are at the far end, whereas Austria, France, the Netherlands. And it turns out that the earlier you retire, the more rapid your cognitive decline, the greater the cognitive decline it is. So I have a philosophy, which is don't retire. It is my philosophy. And if you're going to retire, you have to plan it. And you have to plan the activities, the schedule, the social interactions you're going to have. Move it, right? You have to do all three kinds of regular activity. Aerobic exercise, strength training for your muscle mass, especially after 60 when muscle mass drops 6 to 8% per decade. Really important to keep that strength up. And then flexibility and balance, very important to maintain your range of motion and decrease your injury rate. Risk of all-cause mortality, 29% lower in adults engaging in greater than 150 minutes of moderate exercise and 75 minutes of vigorous aerobic exercise. Notice this is nowhere near 10 hours a week, right? 75 minutes is a mere hour and 15 minutes. Exercise increase hippocampal volume, 8 weeks of aerobic exercise, but not for improved insulin sensitivity. So the more you do, the better. One of the important factors is that there's actually a plateau. Now, golf is not exercise, right? I can't get this in the head of the president, right? 70% of golfers in America use carts. Using golf carts make golf the equivalent of croquet. No exercise value at all, even moderate exercise. Even walking 18 holes with your own bag is low intensity physical activity, and it takes 3 or 4 hours of your life. It is not the way to get exercise. There is a redeeming quality to golf. Let me not denigrate it totally, although I would like to, which is it could be social. It could be a social activity, but it is not an exercise activity. All right. The important also point about exercise is that there's a plateau effect. If you exercise more than about 150 minutes to 300 minutes of vigorous activity, you get no benefit, and you increase your risk of repetitive motion injuries like tennis elbow or problems in your knees. And you also have opportunity costs. You're spending time exercising rather than doing something more important like social engagements. So you can limit your exercise without limiting its impact on your lifestyle. Eat your ice cream. Snacks and sugary sodas are the single largest source of calories now. Packaged snacks like cookies and cakes, that muffin you might have had for breakfast, right? We have gone such that they're about 500 calories a day. About a quarter of the daily required caloric intake is now snacks. They tend not to be very nutritious, and yet we're eating more and more of them. In a regular can of soda, 140 calories, 10 teaspoons of sugar, for those of you keeping count, right? Zero nutrition. There's just nothing in there. 60% of American calories consumed by the average adult are ultra-processed foods. We are the #1 consumers of ultra-processed foods. We can talk about why that is. So here are my 4 easy steps to eating well. There's plenty more you can do, but one is avoid sugary drinks like sodas. Just no reason to get that 140 calories. That water you just consumed, way better. Ultra-processed junk food, especially potato chips and the packaged snacks and cookies and things like that. Get rid of them. So those are the negatives. That's the stopping. The to-dos are eat fermented foods, yogurt, cottage cheese, kimchi, great for your microbiome. Absolutely fantastic. In the case of yogurt and cottage cheese, also good sources of protein. Eat more fiber. 93% of Americans do not get enough fiber in their diet regularly because they do not eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables. So you want the ideal breakfast, and now you can write this down. A bowl of berries, high in fiber, as well as anti-inflammatory. Yogurt, hemp seeds, and granola. You basically have 25 or so grams, depending on how much hemp seeds you put on, of protein, good omega-3s and 6s, and fermented food. What could be better? 2 eggs and some toast. That's what could be better. You can eat your ice cream. This is me with my favorite ice cream maker in Washington, D.C. And a study of many men and women found that among diabetics, eating half a cup of ice cream a day was associated with lower risk of heart disease and diabetes. That ice cream, it's really good for you. So don't forego, just like everything else, in moderation. Okay? Sleep like a baby. Here is the distribution of sleeping times normally. Very few people are short sleepers, right? The president claims to be a short sleeper. That's like 1 in 100 people actually have genetic predisposition to short sleeping. I assume the president isn't one of them for a lot of reasons. There are some long sleepers, more than 9 hours, but most of us, the vast majority of us are between 7 and 9 hours. That's what you have to get. And again, it's really important for your brain function. People who had less than 5 hours of sleep, 25% higher risk of overall mortality, 27% higher risk of cardiovascular mortality, really bad for you. Fatigue, lack of sleep contributed to 16% of medical errors by house staff. Yes. One study found that persistent short nighttime sleep was associated with higher risk of developing 2 chronic illnesses. One of the interesting things about sleep, unlike every other wellness activity, is you cannot will yourself to bed. You can get into bed, but you can't say, I'm going to get myself to sleep. You can get on a bicycle and say, I'm going to ride 30 miles or whatever your favorite is. I'm going to eat only nutritious thing. You cannot will yourself to sleep. All those sleep drugs you might be taking, melatonin, magnesium, halcyon, whatever it is, basically not recommended by any professional medical society as effective. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine says, forget them. There's one thing that works, and that's CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, insomnia. The only problem is not enough therapists. And Americans love quick fixes, and they're not willing to wait and work through the CBT for 8 weeks to get the benefit. But if you do, you actually get a good benefit. The best you can do is make your bed. Don't nap after 2 p.m. Don't drink caffeine or alcohol 7 hours before you go to sleep. It's still in your system and will disrupt your sleep. Make your bedroom conducive, keep it dark, tape over those lights, and keep it cool to go to bed. Still no guarantee. If you're writing a book, it'll stay with you and you may not get to sleep. I can attest to that. All right? Also, forget the Oura rings and other monitoring devices. There was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal called Competitive Sleepers, people who are rushing, and it quotes one of them. Brian Ferris, 32-year-old co-founder of protein shake company Grounded. Anyone drunk that? I don't know. Self-professed sleep nerd looks at the sleep data and his Whoop and collects a few days later. Why does he look at it a few days later? Because it makes him anxious if he looks at it the next day. Well, why is he collecting it at all? It can't make him go to sleep better. And let me ask you this question. You get up, you feel refreshed, and your sleep monitor says you got a terrible night's sleep. Which are you going to believe? Why is a sleep monitor even there? Why doesn't your body tell you exactly how good your night's sleep was? It seems ridiculous. By the way, almost everyone they quoted in this super competitive sleepers, right, didn't look at their data the next day because they thought it would ruin their whole day, right? I just don't understand why we're counting. So what we really need, what you really need when you see patients is a pamphlet. Eat Your Ice Cream, that's my next endeavor, that has the 6 interventions, less than a page on each, so that your patients can understand what they should be doing. All right, we can talk about the fact that not everything should be dependent upon individuals, and that there's really a social practice behind that. We can talk about the fact that we subsidize the absolute wrong things. We subsidize ultra-processed foods, not fruits and vegetables. There's a different way. We could have health promotion centers and wellness centers where we can refer patients. We don't have that in our system. In any case, that's the future. That is my book. If you buy it, I hope you enjoy it. And if you don't buy it, just remember the 6 things. Number 1, don't be a schmuck. So buy the book. Thank you. I'm happy to take it.
That was really informative. Maybe I'll start with a couple questions of my own. I guess you touched on this already, but things that we can tell our patients to do less. You know, I love the idea of like cutting back on doing things rather than adding. So you talked about the Oura rings, and what other examples do you think are salient to people?
I mean, if you ask me, what would the number one thing changing your diet, stop with the soda and stop with the snacks and cookies. And the most important thing for behavior change, by the way, don't even buy the cookies and put them at home. Don't even buy the soda and have it at home in the pantry, in a box, because you'll just get it in the end. So you have to figure out how to go to a supermarket and avoid, as Marion Nestle, one of the great nutrition scientists says, avoid the middle aisles. That is the junkyard of food. Go to the fresh fruits and vegetables, meats and cheeses, the dairy, but avoid the middle, right? There is in every supermarket an aisle of, on the one side, sodas, on the other side, the salty snacks and chips and all of that. You just got to avoid it and not have it around.
Thanks. I bet there are a number of questions in the audience. Happy to toss it out. Start with Michelle.
So probably many of us are having trouble reconciling this administration's view on wellness and nutrition. And there's a lot of good in Make America Healthy Again. And then there's like the flip side of, things that we don't understand. How do we take the good from this? And are there ways that you're partnering with the administration or things that we should be doing to sort of align on the good of wellness?
You're 100% right. These guys are totally inconsistent and not, they don't read the scientific literature. They don't really care about the scientific literature. I would say their stuff on vaccines is terrible. Unequivocally, there's just no ifs, ands, or buts. On the diet stuff, they are generally going in a better direction than hitherto. No ultra-processed foods, pro-plant protein, against added sugars, against salt, all good things for more fruits and vegetables. The craziness is they're pushing beef and beef tallow, which makes no sense. Tons of data that it's not good for us in that framework. They're against seed oils, again, crazy. Olive oil's the best thing you can have. It's very expensive, so you can't afford it. Canola, sunflower oil work very, very well. So it's unclear, but I think they're, at least on the dietary stuff, going more or less in the right direction. The graphic they created, I don't know how many people saw it, is incoherent. I mean, I was part of the team that created the plate. The plate made some sense. It gave you quantities, it gave you stuff to eat, but they have this upside down pyramid with beef at the top, and then they've got some nuts at the bottom, and it's unclear. Am I supposed to eat a few nuts, a lot of nuts? It just makes no sense, but lots of things out of this administration make no sense.
Thank you. In primary care, we're spending enormous time now fielding patients' questions about GLP-1s. How does that fit into your wellness framework here?
Yeah, I am a big booster of GLP-1s. I think they're one of the 5 big advances we've done in medicine in this century since we ended the Human Genome Project. And they have all sorts of impacts that who knew, right? Who knew they crossed the blood-brain barrier and affected the reward system? We are not, however, should not try to have a system where people can eat whatever they want until they get obese, and then we put them on GLP-1s. It's not sustainable. But there are plenty of people who are obese, who we've made obese by our subsidy programs and others, where GLP-1s are going to be very, very important. I have a very dear friend who's had weight issues for 50 years, and I suggested to him, get on, Zepbound, and made a huge difference to him. He switched insurance companies and it was off for 4 weeks, and it literally drove him mad because the cravings and everything came back. But it's not a solution. We have to change the food ecosystem. That's very, very important. And we have to start, with young kids. One of the things I've advocated is, where's home economics? We got rid of it in school. There are a few of you in this who are probably old enough that they were still teaching home economics, but that's, gone. Less than 40% of schools have any home economics, and it's still sexually segregated. That's for girls, not for boys. Well, baloney. And I had a research assistant, 4.0 at Cornell, came and did research with me, and I couldn't believe cooked nothing for himself, nothing. So I gave him a roast chicken recipe. Didn't have a roasting pan, didn't even know what a whole chicken was. I'd never bought a whole chicken in his life. So he buys a chicken in 8 pieces and then roasts it, and it doesn't turn out very well. And I was like, yes, Vincent, that's not what you're supposed to do, right? it's a problem. And I think, again, one of the positives of the new administration's recommendations is people ought to be cooking more at home, which I think is definitely true. And it can be done very quickly. This idea that, you know, you can only do it if you're a stay-at-home parent. Wrong. Roast chicken is you make it in literally about 5 minutes. You put it in the oven for 1 hour and 45 minutes, right? You don't have to attend to it. So.
I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on wellness for our medical trainees, particularly our medical students, where this is certainly an issue.
Why do we care about medical trainees? They're, you know, just another expendable part of the machine. No, it's very important. Yeah.
In light of an article that you wrote recently that med school should be 3 years, I'm curious whether there's an interlink there that maybe we just shouldn't be in med school.
Well, as we argue in the article, there are things that are put off by people, especially family creation during internship and residency, that is really, really hard. And I think there's a huge amount of the medical training that can be reduced. 3 years is just of medical school is just the start of it. And, you know, what are you doing during your 3rd year of internal medicine training? You're mostly teaching. It's not clear to me what it adds, especially if you're going to go on to a fellowship. And the fellowships, you know, I did 3 years oncology fellowship. How much clinical care did I do? 1 year, right? What do I need the other 2? Well, only if I'm going to become an academic and that research is important. Why the hell are we doing it? Why are people who are doing cardiovascular medicine 7 years and 2 years of that is research, where most of them are just going to be community cardiothoracic surgeons? It is ridiculous. We've done it. We do it again at the behest of the infrastructure, right? Why are there so few radiation oncologists and so many, internal medicine people? There are no emergencies at night in radiation oncology. How many, spine cord emergencies are there? Right, 1 in a blue moon. They don't need that many people because there's no overnight. Why do we have a lot of medical people or surgical people? There's night call that has to be covered. That has nothing to do with the training, nothing to do with the education, all to do with the service. Until we get an administration that forces the medical system. Let me go out of school here for a second. I wrote the head of the AAMC after my article came out. Why aren't you leading this? Well, we have to study it. I said, why do we have to study it? Duke's been essentially doing this for 60 years, where they get 3 years of training and 1 year of research. Well, he says back on an email, there's a very high, a 16% attrition rate out of 3-year medical schools. So I asked my research assistant, what's the attrition out of 4-year medical schools? What do you think it is? 16%. Yeah. So I wrote him back that. He says, very nice conversation with you, end. Right? I was told by some of you may know this name, none of you will know this name except a few of the old, Vic Fuchs, one of the giant health economists. He passed away a few years ago, but one of the original 3 health economists in the country, starting in the 1960s. And he says, medical education is the slowest evolving organism in the universe. And I believe it. Right? When was the last time we had a major revision of medical education? 1910. And the AAMC refuses to lead on any of this. They're going to have to be forced rather than actually take a lead. And I think it's terrible. And, we haven't improved things. Look, I don't know what your meals are here, and maybe, you have great chefs who come in and cook. But, the food sucks. Right? The sleep arrangement sucks. There's not a lot of time. And by the way, you have it better than at any point in the last 60 years, right? My dad, who trained in the early 50s, right? 36 on, 12 off for the whole year. The whole year. That was it. And he lived at the hospital and ate the hospital crud. So you guys have it really well off. Count your lucky star. No, I mean, we really do have to reform the whole system. It's ridiculous. Last question.
We have time for one more question.
I'm wondering which country in the world you feel does the best job at following the 6 rules. Put another way, what being born in what country would place you at the highest chance of passing the 6?
Well, the first thing is it has nothing to do with the healthcare system, right? I mean, none of the countries that I know of have done what Slovenia has done, which is to have health centers where you can refer patients. But, you know, there are plenty of countries where the outdoor activities are much more integrated, better food system, and a better, you know, overall balance. I partly sometimes live in Norway. You go out there on a Sunday, okay? This is one of the most unreligious countries in the world. Every store is closed on Sunday, right? They don't practice any Lutheran religion anymore, but they still have family day on Sunday. And you walk around and all families, no matter what the weather, raining, not raining, etc., they are out exercising. You get on a train in Switzerland on a weekend, Saturday or Sunday, filled with people, including people clearly in their 70s and 80s, right, going to hike the mountains. We don't have that. And there's lots of stuff you have to do to make that possible. San Francisco is actually an easy place to be well, right? You drive across the bridge, you can hike in Muir Woods, right? I just did it yesterday, 8.5 miles, you know, no problem. You can do that and have a great day. But we don't, right? They don't subsidize, you know, ultra-processed foods. What do they subsidize in Norway? Traditional Norwegian foods. What does that mean? Well, you're a goat herder making goat cheese and selling goat yogurt and goat milk. You get subsidized. Do we have that here? No effing way. We just don't do that, right? It's Cargill that gets subsidized. You want to change, that has to be part of the change in the system. What disappoints me about MAHA and RFK Jr., and I've written this, is the fact that they are pushing mostly for individual responsibility and not pushing for things like change in the food subsidies. And you can believe that the senators from Iowa, right, where they grow a lot of soybeans and corn, aren't interested in changing that deal. And, you know, that's a real problem. So plenty of countries that are structured in a much better way, don't have the subsidies that for foods that kill us. It's a bad problem. So thank you very much. I hope it was good.